This video is brought to you by Manscaped.com. Dragon Ball Super's been finished, or more optimistically, on hiatus for well over 3 years, or 1,285 days, but who's counting? Hunter x Hunter, eat your heart out. In the last 1,285 days, the Dragon Ball Super manga has introduced us to a host of new characters that have never been animated, let alone seen an adaptation into the current anime style. And so, while I can't animate an entire series in a week, I do have a talented team of artists and I am all out of patience. So, without further ado, let's transform the likes of Maris, Moro, and Granola into what they will eventually look like once the anime comes out.
Whoa.
While we will be taking characters from the Super manga to adapt into an anime style, unlike the last two videos, we won't be converting them into the Dragon Ball Z style, but instead, more fittingly, into the style of Naohiro Shintani, the character designer of Dragon Ball Super Broly. We want to get as close as humanly possible to what these characters will look like in the show once it does eventually come back, and so this seems like the safest bet. That means manga-centric pastel colors, rounder shapes, and bolder line work. In short, I'm very excited to see how this one turns out, and the first one up to draw is me. Taken out of the closing moments of Goku's fight with Moro in chapter 64, this is the proof of concept piece we put together last week when figuring out whether this was a viable video. The thing is, trying to nail down exactly what Naohiro Shintani's style looks like is surprisingly difficult. Shintani auditioned for the role of character designer, and it was Akira Toriyama who picked him based on his exceptional skills with anatomy. According to Toriyama, as long as you pick a good artist first, their understanding of Dragon Ball's style will naturally develop over time, and he was 100% right. The illustration of Goku with the Nyobo was Shintani's audition piece, and although great, it had some scrunched facial features, but by the time he finished his designs for the Broly movie, those issues had been ironed out entirely, and looking further to recent pieces, he's only developed an even greater understanding. However, while his improvements have been incredible to watch develop, this shifting style has made it hard to nail down exactly what his approach looks like. Luckily for us, however, we have a recent anniversary short along with his recent magazine illustrations, which showcase a number of consistent aspects to draw from. With this Ultra Instinct test piece, however, I took a look at the way Shintani had drawn the muscles on characters like Broly, paying careful attention to the mix of curves and angles and how he makes sure not to segment the muscles too much, instead falling back on shading to add volume. All I needed then was a quick glance at the Super Saiyan God drawing for the hair, and it was all good to go. All that's left is to add the finishing touches, and once I saw this, I knew I had to make a video on it. Not just because I thought it was interesting, but because I had to know what the likes of Moro would look like in the series when it returns. Speaking of which, next up, Trev. Taken out of chapter 51, wherein Moro regains his youth, comes the first real look we get at the newly rejuvenated Warlock. As far as designs go, I appreciated this version of him much more than his later incarnations where he became a bit of a Cell knockoff. It is, however, for that very reason this character and his design was difficult to adapt. Whether or not you like this design, it is unique to Dragon Ball, so we didn't find there was much room for innovation in the face. Instead, Trev focused on rounding out the muscles and shading in a way reminiscent of Shintani. Most importantly though, something you may be asking yourself at this point is, what in the hell is with that tiny alias brush you're using? It's doing nothing to help the drawing here. Well, one thing I wasn't prepared for in this video was how different the process would be in replicating Dragon Ball Super Broly's composite, or filter if you prefer. In our DBZ-ifying videos, all we had to do was line our pieces as normal using a textured brush before AJ would throw his filter down to bring the piece to life. That same approach would not work for us here, and so we needed an expert. Enter Mix. We brought this fellow on board because he figured out a way of replicating the line art and lighting effects seen in Dragon Ball Super Broly, and now even One Piece's Wano arc. Although this is something Tatsuya Nagamine, the director of Broly and Wano, developed, and not Shintani, it's a look that stuck around, and we felt it was best to keep it going as it's so strongly associated with the new Dragon Ball content now. In modern anime, although almost everything is still hand-drawn on paper, it gets scanned in and converted into fairly thin alias single color line. This is partly to allow colorists to achieve edge-to-edge coloring, as smooth anti-alias brushes have many different tones that make it impossible to get a perfect fill, but it's also to allow the compositing team to treat the lines as they see fit. Sometimes that's through basic anti-aliasing to smooth them out again, but other times they're treated with stylistic effects. In our case, we have this inky brush look. The line art may look very amateur to start with, but once we apply Mix's filter, Thanks to him, we added some much needed line weight and some diffuse lighting effects too. That's oversimplified a bit, but it really does elevate the piece. It's very authentic. Great job, Trev, and great job, Mix. Next up, Trev again. If you've taken a cursory glance at the internet and seen a lot of fan attempts at Naohiro Shintani's style, you may have felt they looked too round or lacked a serious edge the scenes needed. Unfortunately, that's because a lot of people very much misunderstand his design philosophy and draw from the wrong line of thinking. Shintani's designs are all about versatility. In an interview leading up to Broly, Shintani spoke in depth about his approach, and he said, "The everyday life scenes don't have very much shading, but when the movie ramps up into battle mode, the shading increases and the muscles pop out more clearly, providing greater contrast that makes for a cool impression. Using the same shading throughout would weaken the impact of the parts we want to show off most, so we wanted the visuals themselves to clearly say, it's time for battle." In summary, soft with minimal shading for lighthearted scenes and more angular and shaded for action. And so Trev here had one hell of a job, as Shintani's serious work is wildly different from Toyotaro's. Here he produced strong, voluptuous muscle shapes with isolated bubble shading that added a great deal of depth, along with a fairly old school face similar to the styles seen in some of recent Shintani illustrations. All that's left is for Mix to composite it nicely, and that's one sexy ass Ultra Ego Vegeta. Next up, on the opposite end of the spectrum, it's AJ. In spite of all the action in Chapter 76, the very same chapter the previous Vegeta came from, there's a moment of brevity in the form of a flashback that unveils Granola's mother, hugging her son in relief as he returns home in the midst of a Saiyan invasion. And this one was interesting to tackle. Shintani's approach to female characters is to draw them largely one-to-one with modern Toriyama's approach. This means fairly lanky limbs, large heads, and cute expressions. Although Toyotaro's drawing is fairly close, it needed some significant rounding off and proportion adjustment, along with a massive pose overhaul to make what was originally a very wide panel fit within a 16:9 space. Thankfully, there are many references for women in Dragon Ball Super Broly, such as Gine, Chilai, and Bulma, so converting this drawing across ended up looking pretty convincing. Large eyes, simplified hair, cute blobby limbs, it's all in place, and its approach to shading stands in direct contrast to the previous Vegeta, as this is a touching scene reuniting a mother and son. Throw in a background, some speed lines, and Granola's mother is brought to life. It's clean and it's smooth, but you know what else is clean and smooth? Manscaped.com. If you've been subscribed for a while, you'll know I keep my balls in great shape thanks to my previous Manscaped partnership to keep my manly JoJo body in check. For the sake of ease, I'm sure most of us would like to do our grooming in the shower, and so thankfully, the Lawnmower 4.0 makes that possible thanks to its 100% cordless and waterproof design. No cuts, smooth trimming, adjustable guards. I have total confidence here, and it is totally pain-free. One of the coolest new features, however, is the wireless charging system. Doubling as a handy stand for the mower, this thing charges fast and is great for up to 90 minutes on a full battery. It really is the full package for my package. After you get yourself all trim and proper, it's important to keep your skin feeling great with Manscaped's Crop Preserver Ball Deodorant. Just a dollop of this quick absorbing, clear drying lotion will keep you protected all day. It's as simple as that. With a nose and ear trimmer in their new Weed Whacker, it really is the perfect all-in-one grooming kit. So, if you're looking to find the right tools for your family jewels, head over to manscaped.com and use promo code NOTMARK20 for 20% off plus free international shipping. Your balls will thank you. Next up to draw, Trev. As far as characters go, Meris was one of the best additions to the Moro arc, I think. He injected a pretty interesting question by shining a much more nuanced light on the story. The whole "with great power comes great responsibility" argument I could see was echoing in his head, and yet he was forced to holster that power for what he was told was for the betterment of the universe. I'm a big fan of this character, and with this particular piece of artwork, we had to adjust the original Pain's composition. Typically, when adapting manga to an anime format, as you saw in the last piece, you have to make alterations for it to fit within a 16:9 aspect ratio. This all comes down to framing and compositional awareness. The first Goku piece at the beginning of the video was initially a test to see if this would actually work as a concept for a video, so little thought was put into changing it up for TV. In this particular case, we altered the original by playing around with the position of the incoming fist and added smears and speed effect lines for the punch to better match how it would look in animation. The result looks promising, but in reality we won't know how good it looks until we apply Mix's filter. And there we have it, as authentic as ever. Let this serve as perhaps an indication of how this character might be depicted once it makes it to our screens one day in the future. Next up, yours truly. The beauty of converting styles for the purposes of a video like this is that we get to effectively work as animation supervisors, the staff members on an episode in charge of ensuring drawings are anatomically sound and on model. In the same way they do, we're often drawing over someone else's artwork, keeping what works and changing other aspects and shapes contained within the drawing to bring it more in line with what we expect from the Shintani design sheets. Honestly, as artists, it feels a bit weird with our views on tracing, but this is how it's done in the industry, so we're following suit. In other words, if we're lucky and the base drawing is solid, we can just change the shapes and feature placement a little and call it a day. But in some instances, we run into minor anatomical issues that require our addressing, and this is often part of the adaptation process. And so, due to this reality, when it came to converting this piece into Shintani's style, I not only had to change the style itself, but I ended up having to redraw the foundational drawing of that one arm. And that was just the first struggle. Many of these new characters only have their official colors revealed via the full color manga, which uses very saturated colors that just don't look anything like the color design seen in modern Dragon Ball content. And so our solution was this: use the manga colors as a reference and then find and adjust existing colors in Broly to match them best. Unfortunately for me, I referenced this image for how to color him, and that image happens to be one of the only instances where 7-3 is colored incorrectly. There's actually a mistake on his chest. Thankfully though, this mistake was caught before we finalized the images. Just gotta throw it through the filter now, and there you have it. The arm is fixed, the style is shifted, and the color is accurate. Very happy with the way this one turned out. Next up, Editor-san. The female trio from the Galactic Bandit Brigade don't play a major part in the Moro arc, but their battle against Roshi's a fun one, and tackling more aggressive looking girls with a Shintani twist seemed like an interesting idea, so here we are. Editor-san sure had his work cut out for him with this one. Not only did he have 3 characters to rework, but they're fairly detailed designs, and trying to refine them into something suitable for animation is no easy feat. Following the aforementioned philosophy of less is more, he cut back on the excessive lines in the hair and let the shading do the talking. Not too much, however, for a couple of reasons. The first is that this is largely a comedic fight centered around Roshi's pervy antics, but secondly because even in serious situations, characters like Chile never ended up with quite as much of an extreme shading increase, so it was important to reflect that reality here. Something he also noticed immediately was that the center girl was, well, she was missing a neck in the original panel. Toyotaro was clearly after an aggressive hunched shoulders look, but didn't quite nail it. Additionally, to better frame the panel in 16:9, Editor-san twisted her torso around, allowing for a more dynamic and balanced pose with the rest of the team. And most importantly, he restored the poor girl's neck. Personally, I think the best addition he made was in varying up the facial expressions to give each individual character their own distinctive personality. Admittedly, it's a slightly liberal take, but one that I think looks convincing and fitting. And with a little TLC from Trev on the eyebrows and shading, it's ready for Mix to step in. Beautifully blended in with those distinctive inky lines and lovely ambient lighting, and you'd be forgiven for thinking that this was right out of an existing episode. Nice job, everyone. And next up, me. In reality, Shintani's design philosophy is quite different from Toyotaro's, and it has to be. Animation and illustration are 2 very different mediums. Manga's made up of stills, so you can be as detailed as you'd like, but animation has thousands of different drawings per episode, and they all need to be consistent from one to another. Therein lies the real challenge when adapting from manga to anime designs. One of the major shortcomings of Yamamoro's designs for Super was how difficult they were to animate. Rigid shapes with a large number of lines do not make for a forgiving design. While Super's crumbling schedule brought about most of its animation issues, the designs for the series certainly didn't do it any favors. This is the exact opposite of what Shintani's designs offered when he overhauled the designs for the series going into Broly. And so I had to keep that in mind for my piece. Gas and Elik's faces were pretty straightforward. All I had to do for Elik was to reference Goku's character sheets to form an approximation of his face, while Gas on the other hand was a little more difficult. Fortunately though, for me, he resembles Kid Buu, and he pops up for about a split second in the Broly movie, giving me an easy reference. Okay, 2 faces done. The clothes and hair, however, were a whole other story. In the manga, they're filled with complex lines that just wouldn't work from an animation standpoint, but also turn into an unreadable mess once Mix's line filter was applied. In response to this, I reduced the number of lines and fell back on simple shading instead to add detail and depth, and I think it worked out pretty well. To bring it all together, I grabbed the colors from Whis' Broly movie character design, and there you have it. All we gotta do now is apply the filter and... those are some blue boys, and might I add that I love the crazy flare effects used in this instance too. If you're familiar with Megumi Ishitani's work on Dragon Ball Super and One Piece, you'll know she loves a good lens flare. Move out of the way, J.J. Abrams. Very cinematic and convincing. But next up is me again. Looking on as his surrogate son makes perhaps the biggest mistake of his life comes this panel of Minato. Truth be told, I don't draw Namekians very much, and I've never drawn an old one as far as I can remember. And so, going into this coupled with a strange angle and billowy cloak, I was certain this would be a nightmare to fully realize, but in reality, it ended up being the easiest of my drawings surprisingly. Minato is originally a Toriyama design, and seeing as Shintani didn't seem to do a whole lot to change Toriyama's stuff in Broly, I tried to create a hybrid of Toyotaro's final version and Toriyama's initial version for the character. Both Toyotaro and Toriyama have pretty different approaches, so this meant I needed my interpretation to be more of a hybrid, meaning more regular proportions like Toyotaro but with rounder shapes like Toriyama. The only real challenge I came across was in finding an official color palette for Minato as a character, and as of writing this video, the color manga still hasn't arrived at his introduction to the series yet. However, AJ did manage to find me the perfect and perhaps only colored image of this character by Toyotaro at this point. Outside of that, everything was just cleaning up on the details, big blobby shapes on the cloak for shading, and now it's time for Mix's filter. I'm very happy with how this one turned out, very convincing, and now moving on to my last drawing, next up is me. Of all the pieces I worked on in this video, this drawing here was the biggest struggle. Not just because of the compositing issues it later presented us with, but also because of the anatomical abnormalities it continued to yield the more I worked on it. As I touched on before during my drawing of 7-3, corrections to certain poses and manga panels are a pretty standard affair when adapting for the screen. While I absolutely see what Toyotaro was going for in this piece, when I started to lay down the underlying anatomy to work on this style shift, I realized that not only was the neck in the wrong place, but so too was the foremost arm itself. And when the shoulders, arms, and head are the most important aspects of this piece, there ended up being very little I could keep outside of the back and opposing arm. But in the end, with a lot of trial and error, I managed to finish on something I wasn't too unhappy with. Facially, it took a while to get things right, but thanks to the numerous Shintani illustrations out there, I think I managed to land on something pretty convincing. Compositing was a big concern with this one, however. Auras and Dragon Ball go pretty much hand in hand, but in Super they became so blown out that it honestly made it difficult to see the underlying artwork. While these computer-generated auras were present in Broly also, they were, by design, significantly more readable, particularly when compared with Super's counterparts. And so, finding the effects and proper balance to yield an authentic result was quite tough, but in the end, once we applied the final filter, the results, I think, speak for themselves. This was a struggle, but it was worth it. Next up, with the final drawing of this video, is Trev. I absolutely adore Granola's character design in the manga. There's a sort of Western gunslinger vibe he comes packaged with, and we wanted to preserve that aspect of this persona here when we selected this shot to create our own approximation for an anime counterpart. With this one, the biggest issues we faced came from our struggle to source an appropriate backdrop to this one-time panel. In the end, we settled on this hallway shot from Frieza's ship in Broly. Trev also approached a large variety of different shading styles and angles to find what best suited, partially drawing from Takahashi's section in the Broly movie. In the end, we went with something quite striking and dramatic considering light is emanating from his fingertips. Now, something that did get a little out of hand while Super was on the air was this notion that highlights on characters equal bad when it comes to Dragon Ball's anime. However, in reality, that is completely untrue. Highlights aren't evil, misuse of them is, and boy have they been misused over the years. But in the case of this image here that Trev is working on, it makes complete sense to use them due to it being highly lit. And this isn't a case of us picking or choosing favorites either, by the way. If we wind the clocks back and look at Dragon Ball Z, you'll find them there where appropriate too, and even more recently within the Broly movie. In the end, it's all how you choose to apply them. Dragon Ball Super reached a point where their presence made everyone look like they were coated in oil, with Super Dragon Ball Heroes using it as a means of showing health. Basically, and in short, if used correctly, this can be used to tremendous effect to heighten the drama of a particular scene. And so, while keeping all of that in mind, let's see how this looks after we apply the filter. Here you can see that Mix has decided to add his own changes, like adding blur around the edges to bring his face and fingertips more into focus, and that coupled with the diffused lighting and Trev's incredible illustrative ability make for, I think, magnificently stupendous results. Looking back at this video, I was incredibly blown away by the final pieces on display. I have an amazing team, one that without a video like this would have been simply impossible to create. In the description, as always, you'll find a list of all their social media accounts, and for the purposes of this video specifically, I'd like to shout out Mix the Skella on Twitter for his incredible knowledge and proficiency with that line filter tool reminiscent of Broly's art design. We couldn't have done it without you. Fair warning though, is Twitter's a little not safe for work, so tread carefully, my friends. But with that said, I can't wait to see what the future holds for Dragon Ball. I can't wait to see if we end up being close with our approximations of these shots. But more than anything else, I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you all next week, and thank you so much for watching.